Hey YouTube, this is Robert Ness816, and today we're going to be looking at the proper way to change out save batteries in four popular cartridge types. So that would be the NES, the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, and the Game Boy. These are the batteries that you will need to replace your original save batteries with. So when you get these, I highly recommend getting these off of Amazon, or not Amazon, eBay. Amazon tends to overcharge for these batteries, and also from what I've seen in the reviews, the packaging with them is pretty poor. So I would not recommend getting these off of Amazon. Instead, buy them from eBay. They will also save a lot of money. For example, these are 15 CR 2016 or 1616 batteries rather, and I paid I believe $8.99 for these for 15 batteries, and that's with shipping. Whereas on Amazon it would have been figure $8.99 for I think 8 batteries or whatever, even less. So yeah, that's it's quite a difference there. And then these are the 20 or 2032s, I think. These also came packaged individually, whereas on Amazon I heard that they get packaged in one large bag so that they are free to short out and basically ruin the batteries before you even get them. Now this voltage meter here, this I actually did get off of Amazon. This is from a company called eTech City, and this is actually a really cool little voltage meter for the price. This is like 20 bucks, comes with a little hard case like this, and it's actually a very well made little product. So this is primarily just for checking the voltage on the battery on the inside of the original cartridge to make sure that that is the actual problem. If you still have 3 volts on the original battery and your game is not saving, or your save files keep getting corrupted, then you have a problem with the EEPROM chip in that cartridge, and that would need to be replaced somehow. So this video is not going to cover that. So also what else you would need is these game bits. So these you can also get off of eBay or Amazon. You need to get both sizes that comes with the kit. I believe it's 3.5 millimeters and 3.8 millimeters or whatever it is. Don't quote me on those sizes though, but you need to get the special game bits, and usually when you get them in a set like this, it comes with both. So let's head down to the shop now, and let's get to testing these cartridges, and I will show you an example of replacing the save battery in a Game Boy, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and Nintendo cartridge. Alright, so we're back in the shop here. So some additional items you'll need is solder. So I'm using resin solder. So this has resin built into it, or in the solder, and this is a, what is this one? I think it's a 50-50 mix. So definitely get it in a huge roll like this, because this will pretty much last you forever. You'll need solder wick for removing the solder from the pad, and a solder sucker like this one, or the metal one, for sucking off any additional solder. And as far as a soldering iron goes, I recommend using a solder station like this one. This one is actually quite old, so you won't be able to get it again, but these are good because they keep the iron at a consistent temperature rather than continuing to get hotter and hotter, which could potentially damage your solder pads or traces. So this one is definitely a worthwhile investment, and I am using a flat tip on here too to remove or heat up the solder with. So let's dig into these cartridges. Alright, so to take apart each of these cartridges, all of the Nintendo cartridges all use the smaller game bit. The larger Genesis cartridge uses the larger game bit. So to take them all apart, it's actually really easy. So the Genesis has these 2 screws here. So you just unscrew them like so. Just get this wider view. So both of the screws in the back have been removed, and it just comes out like this. And there you have it. So something with Sega games is that they usually have one board designed for save games, and to reinstall it, it goes in this way, and you can't actually install it incorrectly because these holes are off center here, so it can only go in one way. Game Boy cartridges are actually pretty easy too. This is using a smaller sized game bit. And these slide open like that. They have hinges inside, or little latches I should say. And as you can see, it's actually kind of common for Game Boy games to have leaking batteries. So the top one here is a little cloudy, but this will come off easy enough. So Game Boy games usually have, like, I think 2 different board designs for games that have save batteries in them. And Nintendo cartridges come apart easily too. So you have 3 screws here. I don't believe there are any. Well, there actually is a couple. I think there's 2 games that have 5 screws on them that have save batteries. I think one of them's definitely Zelda. I don't know what the other ones would be, but so be careful not to lose the screws, obviously. So these come apart like this, so you got to lift them up like that. You can't just pull them apart because you'll break the tabs on the top of the cartridge. And here's the inside of a Tecmo Super Bowl. And there's the save battery right there. So and we'll just put that one aside. And the last but not least is Super Mario RPG. And there's the save battery on it right there. And Super Nintendo games have, I think, 3 or 4 different board designs that use save batteries, so depending on what game you have, it'll look different, but they all use the same CR2032 type save battery. Okay guys, so to test the save batteries here on these games, you're going to need your voltage meter here, your multimeter set to voltage. So this one is an auto ranging meter, so it'll pretty much do its thing automatically. And on your save batteries, if I can just focus closer, the top is positive and the bottom is negative. So if you're unsure about looking at it from the back, the large, huge, gigantic trace here is usually your ground or negative, and then the small one here going directly to the little resistor here and then to the save chip is positive. So negative always goes down to a negative grounding point here on the cartridge. So you can see here that this gigantic ass trace here goes here and then separates, goes all the way around the board, down, and then to this pin right here. So let's put that back down and we'll refocus. Alright, so let's test out this battery now. Let's see what we get. So I'm going to go on this side here since it's easier. So on the bottom you have negative, and on the top you have positive. Alright, so this save battery is actually good, so I'm going to leave it. Not going to change this one at all. It's right at 3 volts, so I'm not even going to bother changing that one. There's no point in me doing that because then I'll lose all of my save data. Especially since on a game like this one anyway, so so that one's fine. So let's test out Tecmo Super Bowl. See if it's still good. Tecmo Super Bowl is still good. 3 volts, that's perfect actually, holy cow. I'm not even going to bother changing that one. I gotta find some games here that need a damn save battery. One of them needs it. Let's test out the Genesis game. Jesus Christ, they're all good. Brand new. Alright, well, that's interesting. The Game Boy game has to be dead, right? Alright, so let's test out the Game Boy game here. And this is not even reading a volt, so this one will need to be changed. So with Game Boy games, the batteries are upside down, so the top is negative and the bottom is positive. Oh, we'll change that one. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to replace the battery here on camera without getting my hands in a shot. So I have one battery here that I'm going to take out. I don't even know who the hell makes these two, so it's slightly concerning. It just says, I don't even know. No idea. So let's test the voltage first of this new battery before I bother to spend the time installing it. So let me just zoom out here a little bit. So let's see, what is it at? Oops. 3.2 volts, good. That's fine. Alright, so that battery is perfectly fine then. Good idea to maybe test these two before you install them, because it would suck to waste all that time installing a dead battery. So you can do it like this, free-handed, which is sort of risky, kind of, or you can get a vise. But if you don't have a board vise, then free-handed is what you'll have to do. So I like to use solder wick for this, since there is a lot of solder that needs to be removed. This takes some time, obviously, and get yourself some cutting pliers, get a fresh piece. Sorry if I'm blocking the camera though, but yeah, it should be good. I feel like that's good. So there you go. So that's removed mostly. And then we're going to do the same with this side. So solder wick actually has flux built into it, which helps the solder flow onto it. So that's kind of cool. And you can see there how it just kind of sucks it all away, for the most part. And then whatever's left over, I can use my solder sucker on. So these batteries aren't usually easy to remove because they are flat, so you might need to get yourself like a little set of something plastic here, like this chisel. What I'm actually going to do is put this in a vise, since it's going to make that easier for me at this point, because I always like to use a vise here for this. So there you go. Raise it up a little bit more. Alright, so that's what this is going to be for now, just to kind of lift up the battery once I heat up the pad again. So usually you want to be working on this thing at such a stupid angle like I am, but I'm doing this so the camera can see it, so you can see it. Oops, there you go. So there's that. That's been removed, and now I can clean up the rest of the trace here, or pad rather. It's also important not to overheat the pad too, because it can lift off of the board. Especially since we're using such old items here to start off with. Okay, so that looks good to me. So, and then keeping in mind which was which. So positive is labeled on the board actually, so if you can see that, or if you can see a Game Boy game in person, positive would always be here and negative would always be here. So Nintendo is very good at labeling their boards so that you can orientate the batteries on them properly. Alright, so you want to make sure that you position the battery correctly and neatly too. You don't want it to be off center, you don't want it to be touching anything, so that, and okay. Alright, so that's a slight little adjustment there. Adding some more. So it's important not to keep heat on the battery too, because that will make the battery potentially burst. So let's put this in the frame here so you can see what exactly I've done. So there you go. So I have some flux residue to remove, but other than that, this game is good to go. Hopefully for another 20 years or so, you know? Alright, so after testing on all these games, the ones that needed new batteries were these. And that's really it. That's amazing. So Zelda obviously is used for keeping progress. Same thing with Kid Icarus. Golf is used for the same purpose. Kirby's Pinball Land is used for that purpose. F1 Race is only used to save your scores and stuff. I do have a couple of other Super Nintendo games that I need to replace the batteries on because I did that the tape method on them, so I'm gonna put these in there because it's more of a permanent and I think a better solution. So I'll use those games as an example. Unfortunately, I don't have any Sega games that need to have the safe batteries replaced because you know, honestly, there's no real reason to remove a battery, especially when it's still good. So a lot of these batteries were actually testing at 3 volts or over. A lot of them were actually over 3 volts, around 3.1 or 3.2 volts, which is you know, pretty much like a new battery. So that's actually surprising, and so I'm actually good. Also, on a side note, Doom, which I thought used a save battery, does not use a save battery. This game uses a special chip inside which can be programmed when it needs to save. So that's, you know, hey, that's awesome. Alright, so as it turns out, I have 2 Super Nintendo games out of all of those that need new save batteries. So that's really good, actually, when you think about it. So Super Mario All-Stars, I'm replacing the save battery in because I did the tape method on this particular game. So that's basically, I'll show you here, it's keeping the old solder tabs and essentially just taping in a new battery, which is good, but it's not something that I would consider permanent. And I did make a video on this actually showing you how to do this method. I mean, it'll work, but it's not permanent, and it's not something that's that I personally would trust. So the reason why I showed you guys how to do this is because it does not involve soldering. So I know a lot of people are unable to solder themselves because they either just don't care to, or they simply are maybe a little afraid to because they might ruin the game. And of course that possibility is real, because if you're not good at soldering, then you really shouldn't be trying your first soldering job on replacing something as sensitive as a safe battery, or even replacing something on a board like this that is replaceable, but you really want to spend another $30 on another copy of Super Mario RPG there because you tried to replace a safe battery and screwed it up. So here I'll try to show you how to replace the battery on a Super Nintendo game. So like I said, unfortunately I couldn't actually replace the save battery on any Genesis games because they were all good. And surprisingly, all of my batteries, like I said, are all over 3 volts, except for a few of those Game Boy games that I showed you, those 5 Game Boy games. And these 2 games here, this one being Super Mario All-Stars and the other one being Tecmo Super Bowl for the Super Nintendo. So with this game, I'm going to use the solder sucker. I have to get a new one because this one is an antique and it's falling apart, but and that was totally unsuccessful. I'm going to leave that in the video though, because that'll happen with everybody. You don't want to keep your board here like super tight, so, but then again, you don't want it so loose that the game falls down. Alright, so let's just solder this one, or unsolder it. So I'm putting the solder sucker right up against it. So I mean, this is going to be kind of iffy because the type of solder that Nintendo used here was it didn't have a lot of flux in it, so it's not going to be the easiest thing to remove, because these were all soldered using a technique called wave soldering, which is good for mass production but not really good for someone like me who's trying to fix this stuff. So I'm adding more solder to it now because this has flux in it, which will actually come off a lot easier. So I'm resoldering it to unsolder it. So just cut some excess off here. And I'm going to get this all on video just because I know a lot of you are probably going to kind of struggle with this, especially if this is like your first time actually attempting this, at least to do it the proper way without screwing it up. So I'm going to be doing this now with solder wick. So this is a more effective method. And you want to keep in mind too that you do not want to overheat your battery because it can burst, especially if it's an older one. If it's dead, it can still burst too though, because you've overheated the chemicals inside of it, or the lithium rather. And also when using solder wick, you don't want to actually hold the solder wick itself because the heat will transfer right up it very quickly, because it is kind of a soft metal that absorbs heat very quickly. So there we go. So that's that. So now if I can use some needle nose pliers here to loosen it up. You never want to try and wiggle anything with the solder joint being cold, because that can actually result in there we go, in the battery, the terminals rather, actually coming off, or you potentially damaging a trace here on the board. So I'm going to grab the bottom here. So keep in mind that the only reason why this came out was because the battery, the original one, had been removed. There we go. So that's out of there. So now I can use the solder wick again to remove any excess solder in there, which will make installing the newer one easier, the newer battery. So that's all on there. Alright, so before installing any new save battery, always check to make sure that the battery is not dead from the factory, which can happen, but so we'll see here. So it's holding at 3.3 volts, a little over actually. So this battery is good, and that means that I can install it. Right, so when installing this battery here, make sure that the negative side is facing towards your ground plane here. And if you ever do get confused as to which side is negative and positive, you can kind of follow it either by following this large gigantic trace all around the board, where you see it'll eventually go to one of these ground pins, or just simply flip the board over and look for positive and negative. So on these games here, positive is always going to be over here, because positive will always be facing the chip, and negative will always be here in a larger part. And some of these games will actually be labeled positive and negative. So this particular game was not. But Game Boy games, for example, are usually labeled positive or negative. And Nintendo is also nice enough to put down which battery it needs. So when I put this battery in, I will put it in this way. So the legs on this are slightly different from the original, but as long as it works and fits somewhat. Just kind of get it to fit in there, and then fold them over a bit. So play around with it some. Alright guys, so after you've got the battery positioned the way that you want it, what you want to do here is actually bend these legs in. So this is after the fact, unfortunately, but hopefully you can see through the solder. At least I hope that you can. So what you want to do is, once you get those legs through the holes, you want to actually bend them in so that the battery stays in position here. So you can see here, if I can even get closer, how I have the legs bent inwards slightly. And then after that, you can go ahead and solder in the battery. So I can zoom in a slight bit here before I lose macro, but so that's pretty much it there. That's, the legs are bent in. So as far as these games go, trying to zoom out here, it's pretty much it there. They're all pretty much the same once you solder in the batteries. The Genesis games are going to be pretty much the same. The Nintendo games are going to be basically the same. They're all pretty much going to be the same method as far as soldering in the batteries. The only thing you need to do is just obviously pay attention to positive and negative. So some games are labeled positive and negative, some of them aren't. Game Boy games are, but some Super Nintendo games aren't. Genesis games, I don't think they are. Nintendo games might be. It's all hit or miss depending on the board. But yeah, pay attention to positive and negative, and try to at least position the battery in the same way that it was positioned from the factory. So, and that's it, guys. That's pretty much the end of this video, and I hope you guys have success in doing this if you try to do it yourself. And that's it. So thanks for watching.